So we were talking about the analytic school, and their idea is there is something called the program of life, that everyone lives through a childhood, a teenage life, a young adult life. He goes out to earn for himself and the family, what is called the hunter-gatherer. He lives, then he becomes a parent, and then he becomes the wise old man towards the end of the life. So this is the generic program of the species. And when this generic program is not, you are not capable of navigating it successfully because of what Jung calls problems in the personal and collective unconscious. And he uses the idea of archetypes. We'll go into it when we do it. For the moment, just register the words as they fall. So Carl Jung has this idea that either a frustration of individuation or a frustration because of, or some problem because of overactivation, underactivation, or wrong activation of the archetypes, that leads to pathology. Very different idea. Then you have relational schools, which talk about that when two people meet, given what the two are, an unconscious dynamic happens. Both are involved in creating it, and it's an intersubjective space. And then whatever happens there, if it goes wrong, it leads to problems. So there are two players here, both equally involved in some sense. Then we have eclectic schools like Winnicott and Margaret Mahler. So they will use some part of drive school, some part of object relation schools, and create concepts of their own. So this is how we look at the classification of psychoanalytic schools based upon what is at the root of their belief. Any questions on this?
Not from
So,
my side.
ego psychology schools once again, sir.
In ego psychology, the idea is that the drive, the object relations, they are important but not most important. They are secondary. The primary focus is on how the ego is able to manage all that is happening in the unconscious and the conscious. So the focus there is on ego strength, ego efficiency, and the defenses which are used. So there are two types of defenses, mature and immature. And they would say that the whole goal of therapy is to move from usage of immature defenses to usage of mature defenses. So this is how the ego psychology is. So when we look into Freud's model, we'll again come back to it, that you can look at the force of the drive, you can look at the force of morality, or you can look at the force of the coordinator who is optimizing the two. So they are focused on that force of the coordinator, the efficiency of the coordinator who is going to optimize that structure. And when we do Kohut, we'll again come to definition of ego. But for the moment, just make it a point that they focus on ego strength, ego efficiency, and the use of mature defenses and the strength of defenses.
Thank you, sir.
Now let us come to the first critical thing in our course. What are the fundamental principles of psychoanalysis? When will you say a school of psychotherapy is psychoanalytic or non-psychoanalytic? Any school of psychotherapy, if it satisfies these conditions, these 11 conditions, you can call it a school of psychoanalysis. If it does not satisfy, then of course it will be a school of psychotherapy, but not the school of psychoanalysis. So the first principle of psychoanalysis is psychic determinism. The idea is nothing happens without a reason. Very simple. It is the generic idea of modern science, the idea of causality, the idea of cause and effect. So even if your hand moves just like this, you can't say psychoanalytic, it just went like this. Psychoanalysis will say there has to be a reason in the unconscious or in the conscious why it is so. There is a determinism in the mind that nothing happens without a cause. If the cause is not evident, it's not easy to discern, then the cause is unconscious, in the unconscious mind. So the first principle of psychoanalysis is that nothing happens without a cause. There is psychic determinism that is working in the mind. Of course, this is an idea of modernity and materialism. When we look into the Eastern philosophy, Hindu spirituality, we will qualify this psychic determinism by adding some more areas which give freedom to the mind. So first is the principle of cause and effect, that nobody can come and say one day this OCD just started or this depression just started. We will always say that there is a cause to it. It is not a suddenly it has started for no reason. So first is psychic determinism. Second, existence of the unconscious. If somebody says the unconscious mind does not believe or is not fundamental to pathology, then he is moving out of the boundary of psychoanalysis. Second fundamental principle is existence of the unconscious mind. The idea is that a part of our mind is conscious and a part of our mind is unconscious. And in the unconscious mind, most pathology is rooted and the generation happens in the first 5 to 7 years of life. Third is autonomy and creativity of the unconscious. That the unconscious mind is not like a dead cupboard where you just store memories. On the contrary, it's an autonomous part of the mind which has creativity and autonomy of its own. It is not in the control of the conscious mind. The conscious mind is not aware of it. And it has its own autonomy and creativity. And that we see in dreams. When we do dream analysis, we will know how creative the unconscious mind is and how autonomous it is from the conscious. Fourth principle, pathology is rooted in the unconscious mind. Fifth principle, there is the hold of unconscious mind on the conscious mind. The conscious is not free. Like in many cases, you can tell a simple thing to a patient, he just won't get it. Not that he is intellectually incapable, but there is a hold of the unconscious on his conscious. Sixth is primacy of childhood. That the first 5 years are most important compared to later years. Does that mean pathology cannot generate in the later period? No, that is not the point. But what we see is 90% of pathology, or at least 75% of the chronic pathology, 75% of all pathology and 90% of chronic pathology is rooted in the childhood. And therefore, there is primacy of childhood compared to later period of adult life. And you will often see that if you go into case history, you will often see the child had very difficult period in some period from 0 to 5 years. Then from 5 to 12, there was a relative peace. And after puberty, something started which never went away. And this is where we believe in psychoanalysis that at puberty, whatever problems were unsolved in the period of 0 to 5, they are reignited with energy and they come up with renewed force. So whenever we have an adult and we keep going back, we ultimately find the roots, most of the times, not always, but mostly in the first 5 years. So primacy of childhood. Significance of dreams. Dream analysis is very important for us. The reason is what we don't want to accept in our waking state is coming up in our dreams. So it is the unalloyed truth of ourselves. And it comes up in dreams in a coded language, so we can't understand it. So dream analysis is all about decoding the coded message of the dreams. And we do it because it's not easy to accept all of us. Carl Jung makes a very good statement. He says, the most terrifying thing in this world is to know oneself completely. It's not easy to know parts of us and accept all of it. It's very difficult and therefore always loaded with resistance, defenses. Eighth principle, significance of making the unconscious conscious. So what is in the unconscious? The idea component of it and the feeling component of it. Both of them have to be made conscious. That is a central root of healing in psychoanalysis. Ninth principle, that the unconscious mind, no matter how it is repressed, it leaks out. It leaks out in hypnosis, slips of tongue, free association, dreams, and art. So if you see art of any artist, you can make out something about what is there in the unconscious mind. If somebody is interested, you can look at one of my lectures on my channel, Psychoanalysis and Art. I have analyzed there two paintings of Salvador Dali. And in the first painting itself, you can say something about what is going to come in the second painting. And very interestingly, the title of the first painting is Persistence of Memory. And in that analysis, I say that the equilibrium of the mind is very fragile. Very soon, you can have disintegration. And the next painting Dali makes is disintegration of memory. Persistence of memory, disintegration of memory. And you can actually predict the disintegration of memory coming after looking at persistence of memory. So there is something to these principles. There is an explanatory power and there is a predictive power. But more I would say explanatory power, less predictive power. 10th is normalcy is seen. Oh, sorry, let me go to 9th. So in therapy, what we do is we use free association and we also use directed discussion. But some people also use hypnosis. Some people focus on the slips of tongue, like I wanted to say the other, but I said the mother. Or the second statement, a husband tells his wife, your hair is going gray, why don't you dye? So the dye here has a double connotation. Analysis of dreams and analysis of arts. So slips of tongue, slips of writing, slips of behavior, all of these are places where the unconscious leaks out. 10th principle, normalcy is on a continuum, which means normalcy and pathology are on the same continuum. There is no radical divide between the normal and the sick. It is the exaggeration or hypostate of the normal, which is seen as pathology. One can take an analogous example of blood pressure, that less than 80 hypo is a problem and more than 120 hyper is a problem. In between is the normal range. Right? But the healthy person does not have 0 as the blood pressure. Same thing is here, that everyone has anger, everyone has shame, everyone has envy, just the proportion of it. Too less is a problem, too high is a problem. And the healthy and the sick both are on a continuum. And in psychoanalysis, we believe there's nothing like a perfect body or a perfect mind. Everyone has some sickness or the other. There's nothing like a perfectly healthy individual. There is an old joke. If a patient comes on time, we call him obsessive. If the patient is late, we call him avoidant. If the patient is early, we call him anxious. Under no circumstances can a human being be normal. So that is the way of looking at it, that normalcy and pathology are on a continuum. There is no radical gulf. There are two different countries, the country of the sick and the country of the healthy. In fact, both of them are on a continuum and anybody can slip from one side to the other if life gives stress or if childhood has created stress in the unconscious. 11th principle is the limits of human potential. When you talk about limits of human potential, Psychoanalysis is very conservative, almost pessimistic. So it says that all we can do is to optimize this system. Like we can take this system to a state where you minimize anger, guilt, shame, envy, and so on. There is no way to completely be free of this. So it's only optimization that is possible. You cannot make a leap out of all the problems and be a problem-free person forever. When you look at the Eastern mysticism, Eastern spirituality, the limits of human potential are very different. It's more on the positive side. The Hindu spirituality tells us that it is possible to be free from anger, fear, greed, envy, and so on. Whereas in the psychoanalytic uh, realm, we talk only about optimization and minimization, never being free completely from what constrains us at the psychic level as human beings. So the limits of human potential are very conservative. And the best we can do is optimization. There is nothing like maximization or freedom from the psychic problems. Any questions on this?
In Ayn Rand's novel, she describes the heading of the chapter where John Galt is introduced. The chapter is titled "The Face Without Pain, Fear, or Guilt."
Right.
That is what I remember. And it is very ironical, perhaps, to see that Ayn Rand ended in an asylum.
Correct.
So, because she comes from that Western tenets and she takes a jump on the other side, it's not perhaps acceptable to the community there.
Correct. So this is the unique case of a group of people who are very talented and very pathologically fragile. One of the best examples on the lines of Ayn Rand used to be Van Gogh, a genius in painting, but very fragile psychologically. In our DSM terms, he would be suffering from psychosis, he would be suffering from depression, maybe even manic bipolar, but a genius. So this is where the talent and pathology often goes together. We have a movie called The Beautiful Mind, where the person had schizophrenia all his life, but went on to win a Nobel Prize despite the schizophrenia. So,
John,
yeah. So, these are esoteric areas of how pathology and talent can go together and how one can slip from this side, the side of explosively creative, to the sick side of psychosis. Lacan makes a very important observation. He says, uh, the many of the artists actually are functional psychotics. And he says they are hanging from a thin thread, and you never know when the pendulum will swing to the other side. Uh, One more important idea about psychoanalysis as a whole subject. There are two schools in psychoanalysis, two groups, I should say, in psychoanalysis. One group which you can call classical, and one group which you can call romantic. The classical group is very conservative, almost pessimistic. So they don't get into spirituality, mysticism, God, or soul. They confine themselves to materialism, modern science, hedonism, aggression, individualism. They accept limits of human potential, they accept the goal of optimization, and they are very pessimistic in one way related to the human species. So Freud, Klein, Bion, Lacan, they are in this classical group. They believe in what is called the classical notion of psychoanalysis, the classical vision of psychoanalysis. They are not romantics. They are very conservative, almost pessimistic. For example, Freud was a complete pessimist. There is a very important exchange between Freud and Einstein in the Second World War, because both of them were Jews and both of them had many relatives killed by Hitler. And both of them were on the top of two areas of thoughts. Einstein was at the peak of the physical sciences, and Freud was at the peak of the mind sciences. And there's a correspondence between the two. And Einstein asks him why people go to war and they indulge in some such mindless brutality and destruction, not for a month or a year, but years together. Even after looking at so many deaths, so much destruction, so much reduction in the quality of life, why don't people stop? Why is it that they just keep going? And Freud answers him, and the gist of this answer is that the forces of aggression, sadism, domination, and masochism, they are so powerful in the human nature that the forces of love, compassion, and reason are incapable of holding them back. And Freud doesn't see any reason for this equilibrium to change in the human species. So Freud, like the philosopher Schopenhauer, was very pessimistic about the human race. And Freud wrote a very famous essay, which we will take up in our discussion, Civilization and its Discontents. And he writes there that civilization is a very precarious thing. Our civility, our humanness, all of that is skin deep. You scratch the skin and the animal comes out. So our humanness, our decency, all of that is skin deep. You scratch the skin and the beast comes out roaring. And we have held back the beast with great effort. And that effort is not easy to keep on for a long time. And no wonder every 50 years you have a big war somewhere. It's like the aggression is bottling up. And when the pressure is too high, it has to explode. And one can find any reason in the conscious area of the mind to justify the release of aggression, but primarily it's the release from the unconscious. So he had a very different idea of how history operates, especially in relation to violence, that we cannot find even 50 years of peace in 5,000 years of known history. And that tells us that we are an extremely aggressive and sadistic species. And that brings us to this whole idea that we call Homo sapiens sapiens, but actually it is Homo siculus siculus. We are a sick species. So that is one way of looking at it, the classical notion of psychoanalysis, which does not go into optimism. It's a very pessimistic, conservative, guided by history, reality-rooted approach to the vision of psychoanalysis. This also leads to an idea of the boundary of psychoanalysis, the scope of it. How far can we go? What is the best psychoanalysis can achieve? And the idea here is the best is optimization. Freud says to make unbearable unhappiness bearable unhappiness. Yeah, please.
You can convert the unique misery into ordinary unhappiness.
Correct.
That is what happens with psychoanalysis, they say.
True. So one joke in the Lacanian circle is this, that a patient used to go into a bar every day, and he had this compulsive habit. He would go to the bar, have drinks, talk to people, come out, and then urinate on the wall of the bar. And the bar owner would complain to the police. So he went to psychoanalysis, and after 7 years, again he came to the same bar and did the same thing. So somebody asked him, what was the therapy for? And he said, now I know why I do it. So what is the goal of psychoanalysis? That also is a controversial issue in psychoanalysis. Some people have the goal of a cure. Some people have the goal of substantial cure. And some people have a goal of a profound acceptance of it. and partial cure. We'll go into it when we talk about those issues of what is a cure, what is a partial cure, what is the goal of psychoanalysis. But for the moment, this is the classical vision. Now coming to the romantic vision. The romantic vision is open to idealism. It is open to the Eastern philosophy, Hindu psychology. It is open to very liberal limits of human potential. It is open to the idea of a healthy, positive human being. It is open to the idea of happiness maximization. It's open to the idea of health, happiness, and creativity. And the focus is on love, ego control, superego happiness. And it's open to the idea of, in some sense, purpose of life, soul, God. And if you go in by Hindu psychology, also the idea of being enlightened and completely free of all these difficulties. So this is the romantic vision of psychoanalysis. The optimistic, positive, sunshine-seeing people. And this group includes Carl Jung, Kohut, Tolorov, and Winnicott. These are on the positive side of things. So you have a group in psychoanalysis, which is the belief is of the classical vision of psychoanalysis, conservative, guarded. Then we have the second group, which has a romantic vision of psychoanalysis, optimistic, open to the Eastern influences, and so on. So these are the two large belief systems